our cannabis certification services. As Margie said, my name is Sarah Locklund. I'm the head of outreach and also a cannabis educator. And here with us also today is Dr. Steven Salzman. He is Leafwell's medical director, and I'm actually going to turn it over to him right away so that he can tell us a little bit about himself and kind of his story of how he's gotten to where he is today.
You know, we do these for all over the country, but I was born in Brooklyn and raised in Long Island. So this is my home. I went to school in Belmore, Kennedy, and bounced at the Artful Dodger, and my whole life is back in Long Island. So, you know, I think everybody here like family, you know. Myself and my partner, George, started this practice a bunch of years ago. I'm a trauma surgeon and an expert in critical care medicine. I was in a 7-year medical program in New York, came out here to Chicago, did my surgery and trauma critical care fellowship at Cook County, and then subsequently became a trauma surgeon. When we started and we went through everything, we opened up our practice initially as a small little practice to see patients because our patients were riddled with disease and injury. And I wanted to be able to not be told what to do, who to see, what to use, and sort of try to come at things with a different approach and potentially a better way. And we did, and we'll talk about all these things. But, you know, more than anything, it was very clear when we saw patients, every single patient I saw, didn't matter what was wrong with them, back pain, neck pain, cancer. Every patient had either insomnia, anxiety, or depression. And when we went through treating patients, it was instantly obvious how and why things needed to be done. Phase 1 was sleep. When we got patients sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night, we reset their biorhythms, circadian rhythms, response and perception of pain, all the thinking centers of their brain, stress hormones are kept in check. And it bled into phase 2, symptom management, pain, anxiety, tremors. People started to feel better. And it was clear that those phases were intimately linked. And then on top of that, to implement lifestyle change as patients felt better, these were the way to get things better. And how do I know? It wasn't because I was a trauma surgeon or the CMO of this company or all the research we're doing. I've had 8 spine surgeries. I've had 2 spine surgeries in the last 2 years. Last one left me with a walker, urinary incontinence, and stuck on opiates. I'm no different than you and everybody else in our practice, on this call, and everything else. And it's that street cred, having to have walked the walk before I ever talked the talk was huge because it helped build our practice and helped build how we would go after and get patients better. And there's no question. Cannabis is not a miracle drug, but what it is it's incredibly effective. And when used for fixing sleep, for getting patients an anti-inflammatory response, for marrying concepts together and improving quality of life, patients get better. And cannabis was a very safe conduit to get patients from point A to point B. And so we'll talk about all of that, but I sort of wanted to give a background that, you know, I'm very much understanding what it's like, not only to be a doctor and a trauma surgeon, but to be a patient and on the patient side of things. And, you know, the next time somebody says, oh, ma'am or sir, I understand. No. You understand after it's you, right? The difference between minor and major surgery, right? Minor is when it happens to you, but major is when it happens to me. The point is that as you get through things and you see that when you are experiencing what other patients experience, and I've made all these mistakes, I'm sort of able to crawl back, you know, little by little, fixing very specific things. But specifically, you know, we're going to talk about a bunch of topics just sort of as a gross overview, but we've left a bunch of time so that everybody can ask questions, because I know that's the biggest thing and everybody has their own thoughts in their head. So at the end, I'll be happy to answer any single question anybody has at all.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Salzman. That was really great to hear. I'm sure that it really makes a big difference for everybody to hear your story and where you're coming from. So thank you for that. So I just want to start with, you know, really the basics of the basics and kind of break down what cannabis is for you guys, just because I know that there's so many different terms that we hear and it's really hard to understand kind of what is what. So really, what is cannabis, right? Cannabis refers to the plant cannabis sativa is the plant, and every other term that you hear is going to fall under that umbrella. So you hear the term medical marijuana. This refers to cannabis that is sold in a dispensary typically and is used therapeutically, and also has higher amounts of the compound THC and other therapeutic compounds as well. We are going to get into that a bit more as well. The term hemp refers to cannabis that has less of the compound THC and is typically used industrially, and also to produce the over-the-counter CBD products that you all see available at every store, in gas stations, everywhere you could possibly think of. You can find CBD products these days. Something that I want you to be aware of, and I think is really important to know, is that cannabis purchased from a state-licensed medical dispensary is guaranteed to be tested for purity and potency, and you know exactly what you're getting. Whereas CBD products that are sold over the counter do not have those same regulations, and it's really difficult to know what you're actually getting. So I do encourage you, if you're buying over the counter CBD products, to really do your research and make sure that you're buying a product that's safe and actually is what it says it is. So with that being said, Dr. Salzman, can you tell us a little bit more about these different compounds, THC, CBD, and the others, and also why are we now referring to marijuana as medical, apart from what you've already told us?
So, grossly speaking, the 1.0 versus 2.0 version of cannabis, for the purposes of this discussion, the two things that patients are going to hear about most is THC and CBD. THC is what makes you high and gives you that psychoactive effects. CBD is what you're hearing all about in the news with the claims, anti-inflammatory, anti-nausea, anti-seizure, and they talk about its relationship in treating cancer patients and all of these things. There are other things called terpenes, other ingredients, other cannabinoids part of the plant, that upwards of 150, and probably some that haven't even been discovered yet. So and it can get very confusing. And they're starting to do quite a bit of research now with these various components, things like CBN, because they find that it's helpful in sleep, or THCV or THCA. And these are things that, as the cannabis industry grows, no pun intended, and as the science and studies evolve, they're going to start mixing these other cannabinoids together for sort of maximum effect. And they're sort of doing this cannabinoid mapping, if you will, that's going on. But for the purposes of at least beginning using cannabis, CBD and THC are the two most important things to know, because most of the formulations are based on percentages of THC to CBD, with other products also, grown in. But long story short, those are the two I think that we most have to function on, or focus on, I mean. In terms of medication, instead of me quoting these different studies and stuff, the real studies still have to be done, if we're being honest, because it's still federally illegal. So until cannabis gets rescheduled, and there could be large amounts of money and funding that go into it, where we can do much better scientific studies, these prospective randomized controlled trials, this is where we're really going to start forwarding the sort of science of cannabis. But it is very clear that cannabis has a role in many, many different things. Seizures, which has been long talked about before cannabis ever became legal anywhere. And then we talk about its ability to help treat with pain and the neuropathy and all of these other, and migraines, and all of these potential ailments that they've tried cannabis on. And because it's been effective, either CBD and THC together or individually, these things have treated a myriad of conditions. And that's how it became, known sort of today as medicinal. I think if we really went back and asked most patients, even way back, 80s and 90s when it was illegal, and why do you use cannabis? Most patients probably wouldn't answer, I'm just chilling out because it feels good. Most patients would have answered, they're well, I can't sleep, or I'm anxious, or this, or that. And so really what it turned into is that they were self-medicating. So even back then, it was being used as a medicine. However, laws and thoughts were different back then. And I think we've now evolved in 2020, and it's a different time. And the way it's being approached now medically, it's being done correctly. And we're going to really find out the true power of the plant as time goes on, certainly now going forward.
Great, thank you for that. So the reason cannabis has so many potential benefits is really because of these cannabinoids and these other chemical compounds, the terpenes that Dr. Salzman was mentioning, and these are all found in cannabis. And the reason for the benefits that they have for the human body is the fact that they actually interact with a physiological system in our bodies called the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS. The ECS is found throughout your body and is largely responsible for maintaining homeostasis within our bodies. So really that natural balancing within your body. And it does so by producing endogenous compounds, so natural compounds that are actually very similar to the ones found in cannabis. So because the ECS was discovered back in the late 80s, early 90s, right around there, cannabis has shown so much promise being used medicinally, so legalization has gained momentum and more research is being done. The research that Dr. Salzman is telling you that is going to pick up, and we're going to see more and more research, and we're going to see more and more about how it can help and how the different compounds can help different conditions. One of the changes that has happened with the development of more research is also the development of new types of methods to consume cannabis. Before, you really just thought of it as something that was smoked. There are so many other new methods to use cannabis now, and of course more idealistic ones as medicine rather than smoking. So you can really break down these different consumption methods into three categories: inhalables, ingestibles, and topicals. So when you say inhalables, that does refer to anything that you inhale into your lungs. So typically, again, you would think of smoking, but now we have the option of vaping. So people always wonder, what is the difference really between smoking and vaping? When you're smoking, you're literally taking a flame and you're combusting material, and you're inhaling smoke and soot and carcinogens and anything else that might be a part of that. However, when you're vaping, you're actually using a battery to heat the material, and then you're inhaling gas that it produces. So it's generally considered safer than smoking, and it's also encouraged typically within the medical cannabis community. You can vape flower from the plant. You can also use vape cartridges, and also you can do extracted oils as well. And the reason that people do use this is because it has an immediate onset. And so if they need immediate relief, they can use an inhalable, and it's going to have faster results for them. Ingestibles refers to anything that you would take orally, so capsules or edibles, which are infused food, edible oils or tinctures that you drop under your tongue. And these ingestibles, they actually have different effects depending on how you consume them. So if you use them as a sublingual, so just, putting it under your tongue and letting it absorb that way, it's going to take effect within 15 to 30 minutes. So it's not as quick as inhaling, but it is quicker than if you actually eat something, whereas your liver has to process it, and it can actually take up to 2 hours to take effect. It does have longer term effects, and it can be better for certain people. So it just kind of depends on the person. And then when you say topicals refers to anything that you put onto your skin topically, of course, and it can be great for joint inflammation if you put it on your joints. It can also be great for skin conditions, but they also have transdermal topicals, which actually can be used for systematic relief. So that might be in the form of like a patch, which would be similar to other medications that are administered through a patch. It's just the same. So those are really the three categories that you can use cannabis today, and it depends also state by state what's available. But now that you know a little bit more about the different methods of consuming cannabis, Dr. Salzman, can you tell us a bit about the safety of using cannabis as medicine and kind of some of the key things to know when somebody's starting a regimen?
Well, let's start off with safety. This is the safest drug I've ever used. Now, being a trauma surgeon and a critical care guy, obviously very Western medicine based, you know, the American pharmaceuticals that I've used all can potentially cause death, withdrawal, overdose. Three things that none of our patients have ever had happen. And in terms of safety, it's a very safe profile. Yeah, listen, very much like if you over imbibe with alcohol, if you overuse cannabis, you can have potentially associated unpleasant effects. Some patients could get nauseous or dizzy or have the overwhelming psychoactive effect, which can make anxiety worse or panic attacks. There's times where you could get extremely lethargic or sleepy or have a ravenous appetite. All, by the way, things that we often try to do with patients where we consider it, a sort of bad effect if it's one patient, but it's an intended effect on another patient. And there's a finesse to this. This is a chemistry. But it's important to understand that concepts being used help prevent any of these things from ever happening, ever. For starters, everybody, we go low and slow. There's no reason to, push it to 100 miles an hour. You start low and slow. Another thing is you don't need to be high for it to work. The majority of our patients that we initially start with are not high. They don't ever have to get high. And just because there's THC involved in it, that doesn't necessarily mean you're guaranteed to be stoned or guaranteed to have a psychoactive effect. And again, it's using the medicine under care, responsibly, slowly, with purpose, understanding that we're looking not for how I feel, but for an effect. I take this, I need to sleep 6 to 7 hours. I took this, my pain went from a 10 to a 6. Very black and white sort of parameters that we're looking at. And again, understanding that everybody's different. And all of these different formulations are different for each person. And much of this is trial and error. Although as multiple iterations of our practice have gone on and the thousands upon thousands of patients that we see across the country now, we're getting a much better sample size. And we're getting our moxie about how to manage people. And the truth of the matter is, it's not so much about necessarily one product or another. It's using the product to fix or deal with a certain issue to allow a patient to then go further. Because the better you feel, the better you want to feel. And it doesn't matter what we do or what you try to do and all these things you're going to stick in. It's very simple. If you sleep like crap and you feel like crap, nobody gets better. Doesn't matter what you do. But when you could sleep and you could get that anti-inflammatory response, and we'll talk about it with CBD, and you sort of just start putting these things together, people begin to improve, both in their sleep, in their pain, in their anxiety. And you know why? Because a lot of these things are intimately linked. Sleep and anxiety are intimately linked. Fix one, impact both. Pain. Pain is either, for the majority of our patients, inflammatory mediated or stress mediated. And if you could load CBD in, every patient who has that massive anti-inflammatory reaction, we make inroads into pain. It's utilizing this product smartly, effectively, and with purpose to get things done. And it is safe, safer than any other drug I've ever used, and patients tolerate it. And it is a huge, huge plus when you don't have to sweat it when you give a patient something to make sure the patient's going to be okay just for taking the medicine to deal with another problem. Because Lord knows with me, yeah, you're in pain. I took one. Now one medicine became 3. The pain medicine made me anxious. Now you have to go on Xanax. Now you're on pain medicine and Xanax. Now I'm having panic attacks. Now it's time for a sleep pill. Take a pill, gotta sleep. Little pain, gotta sleep. Little anxiety, had to sleep. How many people are on this webinar? How many people are on at least 3 to 4 meds? Everybody. I mean, almost everybody, I would bet. That's the problem. And it's you have to go after things before you can make inroads in pulling people off medicines or anything else. You have to sleep, you have to manage symptoms, and then you go after everything else. And we can talk about it further, ask all the questions you want. As you can see, I'm very shy, So, you know, I won't answer any questions, as you can tell.
Cool. So we will go into the Q&A in just a minute here, but I do want to give you kind of a brief explanation of the process that you would go through in order to access medical cannabis in New York. Something to understand about cannabis is that each program in a state is very much so its own. And the reason for this is because, you know, cannabis still is illegal on the federal level, and it's only legal within states that have legalized medical cannabis. So each state has its own program and has very specific guidelines of how that works and how people become patients, and how they can have access to the dispensaries where they can buy the medicine. So, you know, it's very much so unique to New York, and I'll tell you a little bit about how it works in New York and kind of that process. The first step is really the physician consultation, and that is what we can offer you if you did want to become a patient. It's, you know, meeting with a physician and having that first consultation. Once you do that, you're approved and you receive a certificate. Your next step is to register with the New York Department of Health. Once you do that, you receive a temporary ID card, and you can actually start using cannabis as medicine at this point, because that temporary ID card does give you access to the dispensary. Then after about 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks, you'll receive an official card in the mail. And then moving forward, that's what you will use to get into the dispensary and to purchase your medicine. So with that being said, we're going to open it up for questions. So yes.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the video at this point. Okay, if I can get that done.